At the edge of a quiet village stood a rusted kennel holding a German shepherd named Bruno. Feared by all, Bruno was seen as a dangerous beast, chained tightly behind steel bars after attacking two villagers years ago. Whispers of curses and dark spirits followed him, and parents warned their children to stay far away. His once proud posture had become tense and haunted. To the villagers, Bruno wasn't just a dog. He was a threat, a shadow of fear no one dared challenge. No one approached, and no one questioned the bars. Bruno became a symbol of danger and deep sorrow. One afternoon, a small truck rumbled into the village, carrying a quiet young family and a 10-year-old girl named Aisha. Dressed in a pale pink dress, Aisha stepped out slowly, her eyes closed, not from sleep, but because she had been blind since birth. Unlike others, she didn't scan the village with her eyes. She listened. Her parents were gentle, hopeful newcomers, but it was Aisha's calm presence that truly stood out. She smiled at strangers, recognized voices by tone alone, and walked with quiet confidence. What no one knew then was that her arrival would soon change everything, including Bruno. A few days after settling into her new home, Aisha sat quietly on the front steps, listening to the symphony of the village, chirping birds, swaying leaves, distant chatter. Then a sharp bark echoed through the air. She tilted her head, sensing something different. "What's that sound?" she asked her mother. "That's Bruno," her mother replied softly. "A dog no one goes near. He's not safe." But Aisha didn't seem afraid. Instead, she turned her face toward the direction of the sound and whispered, "He doesn't sound angry. He sounds sad." Later, she asked the villagers about him. Most warned her to stay away, shaking their heads and calling the dog broken, dangerous. But Aisha simply placed her hand over her heart and said, "I don't know why, but I feel like he's not what they think he is." Something inside her sensed the pain behind the bark, something no one else had dared to feel. At sunrise, while the village still slept, Aisha quietly slipped out of her cottage. Barefoot and steady, her small hands brushed the wooden fences as she made her way toward the familiar sound of Bruno's bark. From a distance, a farmer spotted her and shouted for her to stop. More villagers gathered, panic rising with each step she took. "She's blind!" "Someone stop her!" a woman cried, but no one dared get too close. Bruno growled from behind his cage, muscles tensed, teeth bared. Yet Aisha stood still, completely calm. She reached out gently and said, "I'm not here to hurt you." Her voice carried no fear, only warmth. While the crowd held its breath, Bruno's snarl slowly faded into confusion. Aisha knelt, arms open, and whispered, "You're not a bad dog. You're just lonely, aren't you?" And in that moment, the beast they feared did something no one expected. He leaned in and let her hold him. Gasps echoed across the village as Bruno, once feared as a monster, lowered his head into Aisha's embrace. Instead of growling or resisting, he sighed deeply, like he was letting go of years of fear and pain. His tail gave a hesitant wag, the first in what seemed like forever. Aisha gently stroked his fur, smiling softly. "You're warm," she whispered, "and your heart's beating fast, just like mine." Bruno licked her hand, letting out a soft whine, an apology only she could understand. When she stood, Bruno followed slowly, his massive frame moving with surprising gentleness. The villagers stood in silence, unsure if they were dreaming. The dangerous dog, chained and condemned for years, had been tamed not by force but by love. From that moment, everything changed. Aisha returned to visit Bruno each day, and for the first time in years, he had someone who saw him not as a threat, but as a soul worth saving. Each morning, Aisha would return to Bruno guided by his soft, eager whimpers. This time, no one stopped her. She would sit beside him, her hands gently exploring his fur as he rested his head on her lap with a peace no one had ever seen in him before. Children once terrified peeked from behind trees, eyes wide with curiosity. Mothers who had once warned their kids to avoid the cage now watched quietly, their hearts softening. Day by day, Bruno transformed not just in behavior, but in spirit. He no longer barked at strangers or paced angrily in his pen. Instead, he waited patiently for Aisha, the girl who had seen through his pain. And as Bruno changed, so did the village. Whispers of fear became words of wonder. Elders debated whether it was a miracle or a gift, but all agreed on one thing: something beautiful had begun, and it started with a blind girl's gentle heart. One stormy evening, dark clouds rolled across the hills, and panic erupted in the village. A wild boar had broken through the forest and was charging blindly through the fields. Villagers screamed, scattering for safety. Unaware of the danger, Aisha wandered toward the chaos, drawn only by the sounds of frightened animals and the falling rain. A man spotted her too late and shouted, "Aisha, get back!" But the boar had already seen her lowering its head to charge. Just then, a loud crash split through the storm. Bruno had broken his chain. With a roar that shook the air, he lunged between the boar and the girl. The two animals clashed, snarling and thrashing in the mud. Bruno fought with everything he had, shielding Aisha with his own body. Finally, with one last surge of strength, he sent the boar fleeing into the woods. Bloodied and exhausted, Bruno limped to Aisha's side and gently collapsed beside her. The villagers rushed to the scene, breathless and wide-eyed. Aisha stood unharmed, her hands trembling as she softly called out Bruno. The massive German shepherd nudged her hand with his nose before collapsing at her feet, bruised and battered, but alive. Tears welled in the eyes of those who had once feared him. The same dog they had called a monster had just risked everything to protect a blind child. From that moment on, Bruno was no longer kept behind bars. The chains came off and he was welcomed as a village hero. Children brought him treats, mothers offered gentle pats, and the men who once avoided him gave nods of respect. But no matter how much love he received, Bruno stayed closest to the one who had seen him differently from the beginning, Aisha. Wherever she went, Bruno followed not as a threat, but as a loyal guardian, finally free and finally loved. A few days later, a traveling veterinarian arrived in the village to check on Bruno's injuries. As he gently examined the dog, his face darkened with concern. Beneath the fur and fresh wounds were older scars, thin crisscrossed lines along Bruno's back and ribs. "These aren't from fighting," the vet murmured. "These are from beatings." The villagers stood in stunned silence, the truth unraveled before them. Bruno wasn't born dangerous. He had been shaped by cruelty, his fear mistaken for aggression. For years, they had feared a victim, not a monster. Aisha, blind yet wise beyond her years, had seen what none of them could: a heart still capable of love, a soul longing for connection. The village's fear turned to remorse, then to healing. From that day on, Bruno became more than a protector. He became a symbol of second chances. And Aisha, the little girl who couldn't see, had opened everyone's eyes. In the weeks that followed, life in the village transformed. Where there had once been fear and whispers, now there were stories told with warmth and wonder. Parents no longer warned their children to avoid Bruno. Instead, they encouraged them to bring treats and spend time with him and Aisha. The once feared kennel was torn down, replaced with a small shaded shelter beside Aisha's home, where Bruno could rest and watch over the village he once frightened. Aisha and Bruno became inseparable. He guided her steps and she soothed his spirit. Together they healed not only each other, but the hearts of everyone around them. Elders spoke of it as a miracle, but to Aisha, it was something simpler. She had listened with her heart. Through kindness, patience, and love, she had uncovered the truth. Bruno was never broken. He had simply been waiting for someone who believed in him. And now he finally belonged. This story reminds us that true understanding goes beyond what the eyes can see. In a world quick to judge, based on fear or appearance, it is often the quietest voices, like that of a blind child, that carry the deepest wisdom. For older generations who have seen both hardship and healing, this tale reinforces the timeless truth. Compassion has the power to transform. No soul is beyond redemption, and even the most wounded hearts can find peace when met with patience and love. Sometimes all it takes to change a life is someone who chooses to see with kindness.